So to jump into it, well, I just wanted to review real quick what that safety process looks like. And the agenda tonight would be opening remarks here, review of facts. Facts is sort of a loose term. Let's call these assumptions. I mean, this is basically the things that we've derived from observers that were there during this event. And then I have a few, having talked with Mark and Stan in the past week, we have a few recommendations basically for the club that the board will take up at the next meeting. So that's basically the agenda. All right, moving on. So opening remarks. The purpose of the safety committee, obviously, we are trying to keep the operations as safe as possible. So we have some very loose. We have some very, the safety process is not very onerous for our group. We have a small group. We like to operate when it makes sense to operate because it's a glider operation. So we're trying not to inhibit people from going flying. We are trying to just make sure that when they do fly, that we're doing it as safely as possible. As you can see here, we're basically doing a safety review. This is kind of the first time that we've actually done this with the club. So that's good. That's good on us that we're taking these things seriously, and we're going to try to become better as a club. But we just wanted to read through this. I've got this little blurb here. You guys probably recognize this piece here from the operations manual, and I wanted to emphasize that we do have a safety process. The safety process is non-retributive. If you are involved in a safety event, we would like you actually to do what I'm doing tonight, which is to brief the event. It's a big part about becoming a good aviator is sort of evaluating the things that happen to you and being able to describe them to people around you, and then being able to take criticism. I mean, that's what we all make mistakes. I have a long career now in aviation and doing lots of different things, and in every organization I've ever been in, I've made really big mistakes. I was testing a Gulfstream out over the Atlantic in 2017, and I got wrapped up in the test point and blew right through an altitude in Class A airspace. I had the FAA was all over me. I had the whole airplane. Everybody's on the radio, and they're basically the controllers yelling at me. I'd go back and land. It feels horrible. You call your boss. You call the FAA. And then what you do is you say mea culpa. You're a human being. Nobody here is out to get anybody. My career survived it. It was really no big. It was a big deal in the sense that I busted an altitude, but it was not a big deal for my flying career at all. I had actually lots of people supporting me as I went through the process that we had at Gulfstream. And those are some things we can think about here at the club as well. I mean, we're not here to highlight anybody, but there are big organizations that collect this data, whether it's NASA or the FAA itself. So that's a little bit about the individual's responsibility to participate in the safety process. But then I've got this bolded point here that we as a safety culture within Hood River Soaring, and this is the same as the safety culture in any of the organizations I've been in, whether it's professional flying or military flying, are always concerned with group performance. The safety has a safety group, safety committee always has a special privilege to be able to receive remarks and be able to use those, and then whoever is giving those remarks are not to be punished or judged for it. So it's sort of it's akin to an attorney-client privilege or something like that, or maybe a privilege you have with your doctor. So consider that the same thing. So tonight we're not gonna talk about names, but I do want to encourage the group from here on out that if you are involved in an event, that you could be doing this speaking part and developing your career like some of the guys here that are leading the club have done with theirs. All right, so success depends on teamwork and communication. So finally, the goals for tonight, specifically for this event, is I want to develop a common framework of understanding of what happened, and then simply walk the dog, have a small discussion on and brainstorming session on what we think we can do as a group to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's pretty much it. And I've got some, I've been thinking about this over the last week. I know Mark has been thinking about it, and Stan as well. And we're going to copy down these ideas. And like I said in the beginning, we're going to make sure it gets to the board, and the board deliberates on it and decides whether or not we want to carry forward recommendations or not. Okay, so opening remarks complete. So again, facts of the event, I call them facts. That's a very loose term because these are just observations really from people at the field. Okay, so bottom line here is first bullet, we have the ASK-21 is on a right downwind and landing on the runway. It's stopped at the 1,000-foot mark end of the fifth stripe. We'll get to some pictures here in just a second so we can sort of visualize it better. The L-33 is behind the K-21 on right downwind, intends to land on the pavement behind the K-21. Tug 7's on the left downwind. So basically opposite, think of it like a mirror opposite of the L-33. Tug 7 does not see the right traffic, so does not see the glider at any point, as far as we understand during this event. As the two airplanes basically, think of it as more or less simultaneously turning on final. The L-33 is above Tug 7, and Tug 7 crosses from the observer in the L-33. He sees the tug basically transition from left, below left 7 o'clock to below in front and below right and in front, so like a 2 o'clock position. So basically kind of crossing right underneath them. And the judgment there was 200 feet of altitude separation. The tug obviously intending to land on the grass as they normally do. There's a K-21 sitting on the pavement. The current field operations personnel radios Tug 7 to go around as he sees the conflict happening. Tug 7 hears the instructions and continues upwind in the climb, so it does not land. Basically powers up and continues to the west over the grass. L-33, and then this is just some important facts or assumptions here at the end. The L-33 was carrying a handheld radio, but his ship's radio was dead, and he was not in communication with the field. So for whatever reason, the handheld battery died, it was on the wrong channel or whatever. There wasn't really any communication happening between the L-33 and the field. Although all others, including the field ops, K-21, Tug 7, were all experiencing normal radio communications. And as you can see, I mean, it was, there's obviously a lot, there's some good here too. I mean, the fact that QFOP is aware of what's happening in radios that go around is obviously a good call. Tug 7 responding to the go around is a good call. And the K-21 on the field is aware of the go around as well, and the L-33 on final. Okay, so this is just some pictures, and then when we get, I'll stop talking here in about 3 or 4 slides, and if anybody else who is there wants to pitch in on corrections, feel free to do so. Okay, so we've got some really poor graphics. I apologize for that. I didn't have a lot of time to put this together, but basically, you've got the K-21. Basically landing on 2.5, normal ops for him. You got the L-33 in the right hand downwind. You got the Pawnee in a left hand downwind. K-21 lands. There's obviously a conflict starting to develop here between the L-33 and the K-20. Between the L-33 and the Pawnee Tug 7. They turn final. There seems to be basically a simultaneous final happening here. The Pawnee crosses underneath the L-33 and then continues, gets the upwind call, or gets the go around call, continues upwind. So his little graphic there is above the ground flying, and the L-33 continues his approach to 2.5 and lands about the top, what he said was the top of the second stripe. So another thing that I marked here, because this is important to the observations from the L-33 pilot, was that he normally aims for center of the first stripe. In this case, he adjusts his aim point to, for right or wrong, adjust his aim point to the numbers. But I just wanted to throw that out there so we could all see sort of what the difference between those two aim points looks like. As we all know, there's, Mark, there's 200 feet between top of the line and top of the line. Is that right? It's like 120 and 80, something like that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
The white lines are 120 and the black is 80. It's supposed to be standard everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So that being said, let's see. We're gonna get into discussion here, and it's just basically a blank slide from there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back here, and we're gonna leave this slide up. And if anybody wants to, okay, first, does anyone want to correct the observations? Just to be clear, I was not there, so I didn't. I'm hearing this secondhand from observers who are there in both verbal and in email debriefs.
Is it okay? I know we're not talking names. It was okay if I out myself as the key.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're a part of it, absolutely, it's your
Okay.
it's your call. Like I said in the beginning, what we're trying to we really want to encourage people to participate and own their events, because that's the best way to learn. So yeah.
So the one thing I'll say is my perception, and obviously I was not in either ship. My perception from being down on the field and trying to remember where I was now. I wasn't quite all the way to the K-21. I think I was sort of off in the grass part way down the field. My perception was that the tow plane turned in front of the glider coming onto final. But was the pilot's report that it literally crossed under?
The verbatim, the email said that the tug crossed from the 7 o'clock to the 2 o'clock position. So that's kind of what we're going with, since he's in the L-33.
Okay. When I at the point where I signaled the tow plane to go around, my perception was they were sort of both on final with the tow plane safely, but the tow plane, well in front of the glider. Clearly the glider would have had the tow plane in front of them.
Right.
So minor point. And again, I was in a position where I might not have great depth perception there for it. So,
Right.
And then my only other point, kind of, I'll jump in with a quick criticism of my own position, which is I didn't notice the L-33 on its right downwind until it was probably a beam. The numbers are a little bit further. And if I had been aware, now the radio would have made a great, would have made a great impact on that. But if I'd been aware of it further back, I might have had this, situational awareness of the tow plane and been able to deconflict them earlier than actually ended up happening. But so I'm just keep your head on a swivel, especially for the ground crew people. That situational awareness of just keeping an idea of who is around and kind of keeping the picture in your head of how things are moving, even people who are coming into the area from elsewhere, is really useful.
Okay.
If I could piggyback on Stan's statement there,
Yeah.
I think that's important when we have people up, and if you're out helping on the ground, to keep watching over that. Every once in a while, glance at that high school area, and if you see a glider over that area, to move, if you're helping move towards the runway, because a safe distance from the runway, but moving out, 3 or 4 lines up the runway, so that as they land, you can help get them off. Instead of being just kind of waiting back by where all the airplanes are, because by the time you notice them on final coming in, or if you wait till they're on final, they're just going to blow by you at 50,
Right.
60. And in this case, with a tow plane landing and an L-33 landing, my guess is that had anybody noticed it, I was the instructor in the K-21. we probably would have moved the K-21 off the pavement for the L-33.
Yeah, it developed pretty fast though, Mark. I mean,
Right.
by the time we saw what was happening, you were, I wouldn't
Right,
have had
like
time to even jump out.
yeah, and I guess I'm just making a note on standard operations. We're you don't land on a runway that already has a glider on it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't ever want to say never, because I suppose there's the possibility of there's somebody on the pavement, there's somebody on the grass, there's somebody on the taxiway, and there's some trucks up on that north grass. And so there could be a situation where maybe that is your only option, but standard operations would not to be to have two gliders landing in the same place.
Yeah. So thanks for that, Mark. So if we've got basically, let's say we've got the observation sort of out on the table now. If anybody else wants to jump in, I'm thinking that especially the young members of our club, and just discuss like what are some problems with how this happened. I mean, let's just try to identify some of the hazards, some of the things that could have happened, and then from there we can sort of walk back towards what mitigating procedures may have been missed, that Swiss cheese model, like what are some of the things that could have caught this earlier and kept it from developing to those hazardous points. Does anybody else want to jump in? I just don't want to make sure. I want to make sure that we're not just all the experienced guys leading the witness here.
Well, I was also flying in the ASK-21, and I noticed a plane, and I was starting to mention something, and then Mark sort of cut in, like making sure that I was paying attention to the landing, and obviously aviate first. But yeah, as far as the risks that could have happened, the L-33 could have hit prop wash from the actually never mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great addition to what we're hearing. What about yeah, Mark kind of mentioned already that we don't want a glider landing behind another glider. In fact, the FAA is very specific about the usage of runways, active runways, whether it's a towered airport or not. So now without a tower there, there's a little bit more leeway, like we can sort of use the space a little bit more to our discretion, but there still is a limit as to where our discretion lies. And we need to be responsible for the CFRs, regardless of whether there's a tower or not. So can anybody just, I mean, what's wrong with a glider landing behind another glider that's basically stopped?
Think about energy management.
Yeah, great, Stan. Thanks.
The L-33 was a heavier plane. It might have not been able to stop as fast and would have had to veer off the runway or something.
Yeah, and why are some of those? Why wouldn't it have been able to stop? I mean, energy management's a big, obvious one. I mean, flying gliders can be difficult. Like if you have a big energy package and you on final, you might not be able to scrub that energy before you get to the K-21. I mean, who here has floated a landing a little bit longer than they wanted it to be? I mean, everybody, right? I mean, I do it all the time.
Who's had their brakes fail?
Yeah, there you go. Brake failure is a good one too.
So Mike, just to get the context, I'm thinking about this as a tow pilot. Obviously, this is Rick. So was the L-33 a pattern tow, or I don't understand why they're all in the pattern at once?
Good question.
The observations were given that the L33 had been up for a while,
Yes.
and it just happened to be, I think, and Mark, you were on the pattern toe, right?
Yeah, we were doing pattern toes. The L33
Yeah.
at some point to go soar the ridge for a little bit.
Yeah, and they had been out for more than 40 minutes or so. So it kind of, and that's like another, I consider it another slight miss on my part, is that I had dropped them out of my awareness, which Mike, you mentioned earlier, keep track and kind of keep your idea if there are other gliders out there. I should have been at least more aware of the possibility that they could have popped up at any time. So, but that's what happened. They basically arrived again, we'll call it without warning, without radio warning. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I definitely want to, I mean, Stan, you're our expert field ops guy out there. You do an excellent job, and it's not your responsibility. You don't shoulder all that responsibility to make sure that, and I'll get to this in a little bit when we talk about recommendations, but it's definitely a two-way street here on and that I think is one of the conclusions I've made too about this is that it's not really up. You shouldn't be in the glider thinking field ops has got me, like there needs to be a little bit of discussion. If that's your intent, then the field ops QFOP needs to know that that's your intent. So there's some talking that needs to happen before you go flying. Okay, so let's go to another obvious hazard. So I just threw it up on the screen here. Who wants to talk about why this happened? Why do we have a glider and a tug in the same place trying to land?
Well, it seems like the lack of radio capability in the L33 was a significant factor.
Yeah. And what responsibility does the tow pilot have to see everything in the sky?
Yeah, he needs to be looking for a glider that could be on a right downwind. And it's a lot there. And as a tow pilot and a glider pilot, that converging left downwind, right downwind, I'm landing on the grass, he's landing on the pavement. You see the crosshair, there's a lot of conflict there, and you need to be looking for that other aircraft. There could be lots of aircraft flying around Hood River that are Nordo.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. We want everybody to see everybody, but we fly little airplanes in a big sky, and so we can't rely. That's one of the holes in the Swiss cheese model, right? Is that being visual someone, that's a really good thing to have, but we're certainly not going to fault a tow pilot for being blind on someone that he doesn't know is there. That just happens, and that's why we have radios, and we have other ways. We have traffic flow patterns. We have other things to sort of help keep us safe in case we don't see another airplane.
Mike, I wonder if this is Steve again, but I wonder if when I have done pattern tows, and I know we kind of have adjusted our policy on this, but I always was always making right traffic with the tow plane as well, and I'd always watch for that glider that I just dropped off. Now you've added another one to the mix that definitely makes it a little bit more complicated. But I wonder if having conformed to a right traffic for the tow plane might have helped. I'm just throwing that out there. I know we kind of gone with this left traffic.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I don't, because personally, the conflict happened in that case. The conflict may have happened at the high school.
That's true. That's true.
It's not, we're not talking about, the flight, the K-21 and the pattern flight between K-20 and the tug was good. That's what we expect to happen. The issue here, what gets this into a little bit of a rat's nest is a glider that's been up for a long time and is coming home. So that's it.
Well, I've run into problems with that as well, doing a pattern tow, and I would fly that right traffic, and there was a scenic flight. The 232 was coming in, and he was headed for the high school, and I was kind of making a wide right traffic there, keeping that glider in sight. And I look straight ahead, and here's the 232 coming straight at me, same altitude, getting set up to make its entry. So there are lots of factors there for sure.
Sure.
The other potential conflict you get into there, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the other thing you would have to, if you're going to do the right traffic with the tow plane, is that then you leave yourself the possibility of ending up head on with some left power traffic that's not us, other traffic at the field. And so in either case, there are potentials that still require to keep our heads on swivels, right?
That's absolutely right.
Well, we definitely have a hot spot there.
Go ahead, Mark.
We have a hot spot at the right there, because also one of the things that when I teach all the glider students, well, power people too, is to always look for the straight in. There's a lot of guys that fly straight in through the notch coming from the dowels, and they'll take the straight in. So, so that's a hot spot. And the high school, in my opinion, should be labeled on the chart supplement as a hot spot. One of the things I teach everybody doing patterns is, as we're climbing up out, to start paying attention to everything to your right and glance at your left as well. But people are coming in for patterns, and they're going to fly over the field. And anytime you're in a pattern at Hood River or pattern altitude, there could be a number of airplanes going a number of directions. So real quick, Rick, the airport circular for non-towered airports does recommend that the tow plane and the gliders fly the same side. And that is an FAA recommendation. It's not a requirement, but that is a recommendation.
Yeah. The thing that I've noticed, because I have started to do a left hand pattern, but a lot of times I still can't beat the glider back, so you got to do a 360 in the pattern. But even on right hand, on a pattern, I've found that I can't beat the glider to the ground. So, and I have a hard time picking them out. So I still have to kind of go out of the pattern, do a 360, make sure they're on final, and then I come in behind them. But to just so we don't beat a dead horse, it's all about communications, obviously. If the L33 would have communicated, because us guys in the tow plane, I mean, there's a lot of traffic coming in and out, and it's always on the radio. We're always on the radio. If it's somebody coming in, we're trying to identify where they're at, which direction they're coming in at. So, but I've personally found I do the left pattern just because I can't beat the right. I can't beat them down if I go to the right. And so I got to orbit off to the north.
Yeah. Hey, I'll jump in there too, just to add to Rick's comment. As a tow pilot, another thing to consider for those of you that don't fly tow is the ability for the tow pilot to understand what's coming over the radio is highly dependent upon the engine, the power setting of the engine. So on takeoff, there's a little bit of trust. There's a lot of times you're like, was that a call I heard? Was he talking to me? Because it's really loud. So the usage of airplane signals is really important, especially in high power. But when we're coming to land in your low power, the comm is actually very clear, and it's very easy to build SA in the tow plane when you're in the pattern, or especially when you're coming down off of the 180 or off the beam position, because there's very little noise at that point, and so it's really easy to build SA. And as you can tell, I mean, with a tow pilot in this case, it sounds like he responded really quickly to Stan's call. And that doesn't surprise me, But again, if he was on the upwind and he's climbing, you might be not so confident that a quick call is going to mean anything to the tow pilot. So,
Mike, what was that phrase you said? SA?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, situational awareness.
Okay.
SA.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One, with respect to the L-33 pilot. So he had a handheld. Was he receiving?
No, there was no the comment from the L-33 pilot was my radio must have changed frequencies. So that to me means he's not hearing anything, and anything he's transmitting is not reaching the field.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we know with respect to the tow plane pattern, how far to the east was his base leg versus the glider?
I don't the picture I drew don't put a lot of credence in that. I'd have to yield to Stan on that one. Unfortunately, the tow pilot L-33 isn't here to speak.
Yeah, and again, I'll again realizing that I'm looking up and just using depth perception and not, I don't have a side angle on him, but my impression was that the tow plane turned in front of the glider. That's my memory of it, is that the glider was kind of finishing its turn to final at the time that the tow plane turned onto final in front of it, because then they both ended up, the tow plane could not see the glider once it was established in front of it. And basically they looked to me like they were both on essentially the same glide slope with the tow plane in front. And that's when I made the call for the tow plane to go around.
Yeah, just query whether or not it might make sense for the tow plane to do a little bit of a longer pattern. So he's set up on final, before you get to the point where the glider would be on his base.
Yeah, and this goes back. This is that really tricky situation where the tow pilot thinks he's got everyone accounted for because he's only got one airplane, only one glider in the area. So, the tow pilot is going to be balancing a wide pattern that's maybe can accept a sort of a surprise glider with flying a tighter pattern that's sort of better for the tow plane's energy management, potential engine problems, the number of hours on the engine and all that other stuff. So those are things that the tow pilot has got to sort of balance. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand. It was just an idea.
Yeah. Yep. And that's what we're doing. Thank you for that. We're just throwing them out there.
Hey, this is Mark. A couple things. Ethan, crew resource management. Where did you see the L-33?
I know it was after we turned on to final. It might have been like 10 to 15 seconds after that or it might have been the L-33, it might have been the tow plane. I just saw something in the air behind us. So it was probably like me seeing the tow plane just coming in behind us, because I saw it to our left, and so
saw the tow plane. Okay, you meaning after we already turned final?
Yeah, that's when I saw it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're all. I mean, one of the things I always try to remind anybody I'm flying with, whether they have more experience than me, same experience than me, or less experience than me, we're a crew, and always point out traffic, and as simple as traffic 3 o'clock, and then back to like what we're doing, and okay. And then when we were sitting on the runway, Stan had said to me, the L-33 pilot, or after the whole thing kind of resolved the situation, he said the L-33 pilot, the L-33 didn't have a radio, or the battery was dead, and the L-33 pilot doesn't have a radio. So well, I'm still conflicted to whether the pilot was carrying a radio or not. But not that he's legally required to, but at this point in time, I was told I don't know. I mean, I'm still under the assumption that he actually never even had a radio with him.
Yeah, and I want to offer that may well have been a misperception on my part when the pilot was getting the L-33 ready. We clearly discussed that the battery at that point was dead. It was in the ship, but dead because the charger had not been hooked up to it. And so it was clear, and the pilot was well aware that it wasn't there. My impression was, and I give this a coin flip. My impression was that there was no other radio, and the pilot decided to go anyway.
Also, Kelly took Rin back to Sam's house.
Say that again, please.
Oh, okay.
What was that, Ron? I missed Ron's comment there.
I think he was just off mute for a second.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So
Stan,
and otherwise I would have, I think, I don't know. I feel like I would have expected to hear the pilot say something like, "No problem, I have a handheld," or I would have checked. I would have done a radio check with the pilot, if I'd known to make sure that the handheld was available. Anyway, so that was possibly a complete misperception on my part, Mark, that I inserted into your awareness. So
okay, that's cool. That pilot I'd always known to have one, but
I don't have any.
We leave things at home.
yeah, I don't have any solid comment to say that I'm at all sure that he didn't. So that's
Okay.
So it's my understanding then that the tow pilot never saw the L-33. Is that correct?
We think that's correct.
I believe that's correct. I mean, basically, the tow pilot established on a very nice, stable, final approach for the grass. So that's my assumption. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then the other thing that we heard is that the tow plane crossed underneath the L-33.
And this may be a matter of perceptions.
Right.
Again, I'll say I was in a place where I was only using depth perception, and maybe the perception of the pilot was that the tow pilot was at a lower altitude, and so it seemed like under. But my perception was that it was not a crossing in two-dimensional space, but that the tow pilot was actually turned on in front, because the tow pilot had ended up in front, and they're not going 30 knots different in speed. I mean, they're within 10, 15 knots of each other at that point.
And when you called, Stan, when you called for the tow plane to go around, he was lined up for the grass already.
Correct.
Right. So their paths, and their paths definitely crossed then, because the L-33 ended up landing on the asphalt. I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head around how that worked there. But in my mind,
Steve, I was surprised when I was reading the debrief from the L-33 pilot. I thought at first, when I thought 7-2, I was like, he must be mistaken. I didn't jump back into it with him. I just kind of went with it, and I was like, okay, I guess if he's kind of coming lower left, and they are crossing, because they have to cross at some point, because the Pawnee is on a left downwind to the grass, and the L-33 is on a right downwind to the right base to the pavement. So there has to be a crossing at some point. So I kind of went with it. But again, it's just an observation from someone that's kind of spitballing. He said 200 feet in terms of elevation, but or altitude difference, but who knows?
Right. To me, there's a couple things that we could definitely learn from this that I see right on its face. And one is, if you have a radio that you're communicating on and happens, you should be listening for some other radio communications. If you're on the wrong frequency, then there'd be nothing. You wouldn't hear anything. So that's something, if you are on a radio and you can't confirm that the frequency is there, you'd probably want to try to make some verification that you're getting something back in your communications. Yeah. And then secondly, obviously, as a tow pilot, now after this, when I'm flying a tow plane, I'm going to be looking a lot more vigilantly. I think that's something we need to get out to all the pilots to be much more vigilant, looking for that other traffic that may pop up that doesn't have a radio.
Yeah, this might be a good time to get into just kind of walking out further from this conflict here, back up to somewhere like here, and this is this is the comm calls, and Mark wanted to sort of emphasize this tonight. And I think this is a great time to do that. The a good clear comm call is not identifying the end number of the airplane. It's just identifying that you are an airplane, and where you are in position and in altitude. And then if you're a really good comm call, it will also give someone some idea of what your performance is. So you'll hear experienced guys like Mark say big white glider, at the high school at 2,200 feet. That's a really good call. Or big white glider downwind 2.5, because if you're flying the pattern in the right, if you're flying the pattern correctly, then downwind on 2.5 means you should be at 800 to 1,000 feet, something like that, or 800 to 1,200 feet. So you don't really need to give, you're not going to be giving the altitude. I think that's the obvious part of the comm call, but the part of the comm call that I think it's missed sometimes is that a good comm call will also let everyone else know your level of situational awareness. So for example, imagine yourself, the field, and I'm talking to the younger guys here specifically. Imagine the field ops, right? And you see this happening. You actually see the L-33 and you see the Pawnee. The L-33 hasn't made a call, and the Pawnee says, tug 7, downwind, left downwind, runway 25 grass. Now that should tell you that you have a problem, because what he didn't say is left downwind 25 grass number 2. And the number 2 is very important because that lets you as the field ops person know that the Pawnee pilot sees the traffic that's going to land in front of them. And then that should give everybody that's listening in to the radio sort of the warm and fuzzy that we've got this suitcase. But so sometimes what you don't hear is just as important as what you do hear. It'll really tell you the level of situational awareness. I try to do that all the time. And I talk like, I know no one's taping us, but if you're at a towered airport, you're on tapes, and whatever you say, if you say it correctly, then it's really on the air traffic controller to correct you if you happen to be incorrect. So for example, if you're takeoff or if you're clear to land, I always say, hey, I am clear to land runway 25. And then I'm confident I just go land on 25, because if that is wrong, then you can be like, roll the tapes. I said 25 and you didn't correct it. So so that kind of attitude, I think, would go a long way here at the field. Does anybody have any other comments about comm calls? I mean, obviously there are also some good ways, thinking about it, sitting here at your desk and being like, right downwind runway 25, right base runway 25. That's easy to say. So what I encourage you all to do is to get out on your bicycle and try to do it in your bicycle. There was a pilot workshops thing where they're talking about throwing a pan and saying your comm calls. I think that's really good. If you got to get your brain thinking about something else, and then get your brain stem, that thing at the base of your neck, you got to get that making the comm calls, because then your brain can be focused on flying the airplane and you can be clear and concise. But again, just to sort of beat the dead horse, we're not interested in your end number. We're just interested in your performance and where you are in time and space. And if you can, give us your situational awareness. If you don't give us your situational awareness, you don't say number 2 for landing, then we know your low situational awareness. And then we can start moving other people out of the way.
Hey, Mike, it's Ron. Just another observation, and this happened more when we had the 233, which didn't have a radio, or sometimes didn't have portables.
Yeah.
Often this ground crew or field manager, you may know that the glider doesn't have radio in it, or they may not be operating. So often when I would see somebody on downwind on the glider not hear radio calls, or they're busy and maybe they're a new pilot, it's okay for the ground guys to make a call for them also.
Yeah.
So that, orange glider, right downwind for 2.5.
Yep.
Just kind of help them out.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I really appreciate that. And that that goes to the comm plan and the loss comm plan that we should all have, even if we're flying gliders. I mean, even if you don't have a radio, which I would not recommend going up in our situation without one, and we'll talk about that at the end. You need to have a plan in the sense that you need to have talked to the ground ops and say, hey, look, I'm, hypothetically, again, we're gonna talk about whether it's gonna be rule or not, but I don't have a radio, so I'm gonna take off now. I'm gonna be back in 20 minutes. And I would appreciate if you set your watch at 15 minutes and start looking for me. That's a plan that can actually help somebody. But going up to the ridge and being like, I'll see you when I see you, and I don't have a radio and my ship's radio is dead and all that stuff. That's just not helping us out, looking out after each other.
Mike, another thing that I would do when I was towing pattern tows is, and I was making right traffic, but I'd say I've tow sevens entering a right downwind runway 25, number 2 to land behind the glider that's on downwind, because I knew the glider didn't have a radio that wasn't working, or I couldn't understand what he was saying anyways. So you can call traffic for him as well, and kind of make everybody else aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
When I'm instructing, I actually, especially if it's a newer guy, and I hear the tow pilot make that call for us, or make that call, then I just keep instructing, because I'm like, oh great, the tow plane is, and this goes back to how Judy always taught towing. She always taught for the tow pilot to be like mini ATP. Now, not to put that onto the tow pilot, but when you guys make that call, I love it, because then I keep instructing, and you've just told everybody else in the airport, I'm here. There's a glider here, and I'm coming in. So I always appreciate that.
Thanks, Mark.
There are some guys in the club that have been around for a while that still seem to be flustered on the radio, where, for example, they'll say, glider on downwind for runway 25 right. Well, we don't have a runway 25 right. So that can be confusing. And when I've heard that, I will gently mention that to them. But I think it's, if people have any, if people aren't totally comfortable, then they really need to practice.
Yeah, and remember, this is not a complicated. We do the 99% of the time. We're going the same place, saying the same calls. If you need to write them down on an index card and tape it to your panel, just so you can read it off real quick. It should be very short. Big white glider, right downwind 25. Big white glider, base runway 25. I would argue you don't need to make a final call. And then we also need to chat about the initial point at the high school. What does that call sound like? And should we provide any more situational awareness to the field when we're leaving the ridge? So just throwing that out there, you guys can chat about it.
Well, the advisory circular on uncontrolled or untowered airports says you should call in when you are 10 miles out. And obviously the ridge is less than 10 miles out, but I would maintain that you should be calling and letting everybody know you're on your way back from the ridge. It's it can't hurt. And I would say that it complies with that circular.
Well, I would just modify that to say when you're inbound for landing. It could be a little different than just leaving the ridge, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Inbound for landing.
Basically approaching the field. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And we used to say that in the military, we'd say RTB. That was it. If your mind was scrambled from dogfighting, all you had to do is like, we're RTB. It's like 3 letters. And I think that would be a lot of and for those of you, that's route to base. So it's just 3 letters. If you're leaving the field, you're leaving the ridge, big white glider leaving the ridge, I'm RTB. And that means, hey, I'm coming down. And if you can throw an altitude out there, that helps traffic approaching the airfield as well.
Yeah, I mean,
The
it's
other
been a
thing-
common theme here, but I'll just agree that my not being aware of the glider until it was late on its downwind. If I'd heard even a scratchy call, even if I'd heard a bad handheld call that was buried in somebody's lap and I could barely tell it was a glider, it would have, I think it would have put it in my head, and maybe in the tow pilots as well, and that might have. So, gosh, that's such a. I mean, we always have to be ready to not count on the radio, but my gosh, that was one of the links that broke in the chain here,
Right, and that also gives the pilot of the glider, when he makes that call that he's inbound, gives him a little bit more time to say, hey, gee, am I on the right frequency? I'm not hearing anything. Something might not be going on here. So I think it's important to establish that communication earlier rather than later.
Yeah, those are great points. Those are all elements of powered flying. It's just like we're a tiny little microcosm of like Chicago O'Hare. It's like all those elements of an airliner getting in there is all things that we need to do too, and they're just a little bit less complicated. But you're absolutely right, Steve. There's a two-way communication that the FAA is determined is very important, and so establishing that if we can, and the other thing is coming back from the ridge, it's generally you're still kind of cruising. I mean, you're not pointed at the ground with the die breaks out. You're still just cruising. It's easy. So you may as well sort it out there and get everything ready to go as you're coming back at a walking pace to the high school. Get a warm fuzzy that you've got two-way comms with the ground, and that's a great point.
Mike, this is Rick. I've noticed something on the ground before when I've been towing, and that was a powered plane coming into land. He was left downwind for 7. It was like a J3 Cub, no comms. So I think if we see something like that when we have glider ops, that somebody should be calling that out too.
Yeah, and that's another case where I will try to stay as a ground op. I will try to stay really aware of that, both listening to the radio and just kind of keeping a scan going. And if I see something like that, I will try to, if and it's not already being discussed on the radio, I will try to get on and let people know, because that's a really good point.
Yeah, and we've seen some of that this year at the field. In fact, I was towing when I don't remember who was out there, but
was that Cessna that came in?
Into land. Was that you, Steve?
Yeah, that was me.
And he did the teardrop and landed 7 because he was the rough engine. That's right.
Yeah, that was the girlfriend with the big giant eyes who thought she was going to die in a plane crash that day.
Yeah, it's just you really got to have your head on a swivel and be aware of where everybody is and who's coming in. And they're not always going to have radio. That guy didn't make any radio calls.
That was actually interesting. Yeah, same situation there. The guy was on the wrong frequency and was task loaded and did not get himself on the right frequency. So we were not able to talk to him, and he was not able to talk to us. So.
Yeah.
Mike, can I jump back real quick? And if you don't want to go further this far back, the other possible question to ask is, what else could the glider have done? The glider was established for the pavement, and even after the tow plane took off, the glider stuck with that plan, right? And did a skillful job of putting it down early and stopping it in plenty of time. But what else? And I'll ask if you want to ask this of our young pilots. What else could the glider have done at that point that might have made given the pilot more margin and more safety than landing on the pavement?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Any of the young guys, you guys can jump in.
We have the grass part of the runway.
Yeah, absolutely. Where else? Where else can we land? Let's say the grass. There's a glider on the runway. There's a glider on the grass. Where else could you put down a L-33 sized airplane?
Mike, can you go forward one picture? I think it zooms in on the airport.
Yeah.
Or back maybe.
This.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, even better.
Yeah, that's a very real possibility, because if Stan wouldn't have been there to wave off the tow plane, he would have been on the grass. You still have the glider on the pavement. So then what does the glider pilot do?
Well, he could go taxiway or the grass on the other side of the air on the other side of 2.5, but Stan or some grounds people could be there. So that's probably a secondary option.
You
Are
can
you
go.
talking about the grass on the residence side?
Hmm.
I think am I correct that there's arguably sufficient grass up on the north side, or is that construction compromise that at this point?
No, that you still could land there, I think, on the north side of the taxiway.
I mean, that's like the third backup, you're right. So, but it still is an option. It's better than running up the bottom of another aircraft, right?
Absolutely. We did have a situation last 2 summers ago that our tow plane took off with a 126, and someone had another glider had landed on the grass as the glider was departing, and there were a couple airplanes lined up at the hold short line on the taxiway, and that the glider pilot had an issue with their seat and accidentally pulled the
Boat plane coming in.
I think on purpose
this
pulled
happened.
this
glider didn't communicate.
pulled the release, and when they came back around, one of the Cubs at the hold short line had actually pulled out. Now that's a no-no on the Cub, and that's something for especially the new guys, that anytime there's people holding up for us to go, we ask them to wait until we turn crosswind just in case we have a rope break. But they quickly noticed what was going on and zipped right around and moved out of the way, and the 126 landed back on 7 or 25. But they could have or would have maybe possibly had that Cub pulled out and continued taking that north grass. That would have been a great option.
Another thing to think about here, in that same scenario, if you are staring at a final and your picture looks like you've got a glider, maybe here, maybe even closer than the 5th stripe, third stripe or something like that, you've got traffic waiting to take off the hold short, and you've got the Pawnee in front of you. You really shouldn't. It would be a very unique situation like the one that happened a couple Saturdays ago, but let's just go there. Just consider, if you wanted to choose, you didn't. The taxiway is obviously not going to be an option because you've got non-participating airplanes there. So you'd probably want to stay away from there. North grass maybe, but the tow plane is under its own power, right? So it's probably going to land. It's probably going to land and taxi off. In fact, they usually just continue to taxi and pick up the glider that's on the pavement. That's sort of the normal ops for the Pawnee. But the Pawnee's obviously going to leave the grass faster than the K-21's going to leave the pavement. So consider that. Also consider that grass is more friction on your airplane. So if you do have a brake failure or something like that, there's more to slow you down. So I mean, I kind of like the grass as if everything kind of looks ugly. I'm gonna go for the grass.
And at this point, it's definitely beating the dead horse, but all of these situations would be at least a little bit better with radio communication. So
yeah, thanks. So we're at 8:30. We're about an hour. Let's just sort of try to wrap this up. So we kind of been through all this, comm plans. So I just want to hit this again. Responsibility of every PIC to prepare and execute a comm plan. Part of the comm plan is the lost comm plan. So think about, like, if I'm going to have a radio and then the radio is going to go dead. What are you going to do? Think about it before you get in the airplane. It's basic airmanship stuff. So some ideas for a lost comm plan: you can carry a backup handheld. You can try your cell phone. You can text. Maybe you have the QFOP cell number. Not condoning texting and flying, but if it gets to that point, use all your resources that you have. Lost comm signaling that we did in the military, we came in the break and rocked our wings. So maybe fly overhead and rock your wings, and maybe you'll get some attention and be like, hey, what's going on with that guy? Let's just watch him, and that might be a good thing to do. These are all just things that you can just use your imagination, come up with it, and then talk with whoever's the field ops guy. Just talk with that person about it, because that could really help prevent a bad situation from happening. So we talked through the comm usage. What does a good call sound like? Remember, we're just trying to hit basic, what's my performance, basic, what's my position, and basic, what's my situational awareness. We can do that literally in 3 or 4 words. And then what are the elements of a good call? So it's not just position, but it's also that situational awareness. We want to de-emphasize reading off the end number or trying to memorize what your call sign is. Not important for a non-towered airport. It's important when you get into instrument flying. And then we just went over landing sites. So, these are just some questions, but we've been over where we can land at Forest 2. Everybody knows that they're not separate runways, right? The port has determined that those are all the same runway. So we should treat them like the same runway when we're not using them as a club, like multiple runways. So when the other people are using the runways, we need to be curious in them and what they're doing. The FAA is very serious about runway incursions. Runway incursions are not only at towered airports. They happen at non-towered airports too. They're a very big deal. So that's why we're doing this. We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. What does HRS manual say about recovery? I wrote it down so nobody has to look it up. It says operations manual section 11, quote, all gliders will primarily land on the paved surface. If the paved surface is occupied, gliders should land on the grass. That's it. That's all we got in the HRS operations manual. We'll go over that recommendations here in a second. So conclusions and recommendations. We talked about this, develop a comp plan before you fly. I think that the board needs to maybe look at being a little bit more specific on the language here. In the recovery section, we can at least look at it. I think the basic principles are there. We've talked about practice. We did not talk about here, but Mark and I have been talking about practicing landing on alternate landing sites. So I think that needs to be something that we're all comfortable doing, and not sort of a scary first time thing because there's some unique thing happening at the airfield and we've never landed on the grass before. We'll use alternate landing sites. Mark's gonna be in charge of that, Mark and Steve. But we just want to make sure we're gonna use prior coordination and not surprise anybody. And then practice your radio calls. Everybody needs to do it. I do it. I need to do it. I need to get in the airplane, practice it. You want to sound good on the radio. So just take a few minutes every night and go through some basic comm calls. Write them down on a index card and tape it to your panel if you think you need to. I don't see anything wrong with that. So I'll just throw it over to Mark here to wrap it up. If you got any last minute comments, we'll get people onto their evening.
No, other than Mike, I really appreciate you taking us through the safety process and focusing us on the group performance and looking at ways to improve. I was actually I was going to start talking with this about some of the CFIGs about, spending a few more of our patterns, taking one and landing in the grass just for getting ready for that possible someday for those of you that may try to fly cross country and you have that out landing. And Stan had actually, with this process, recommended having students, someone just pulled out onto the pavement, and have you kind of move over to land on the grass. So, which I think is a great recommendation. So we'll probably practice that and do some practices with that. I this summer I had a couple off-field landings, and one was actually at an airport, so that was a good deal. The other one was actually in a farmer's field over south of Hillsborough, and and it was really kind of no big deal. I got low, and and I was about 10 miles from the Willamette Soaring Club, and I, you know, I have my own altitude that I choose at, okay, this is time to start looking for a field. And I got down to that altitude, and you know, I think I was around 1,500 feet above ground, and saw this nice, I mean, you could have landed a couple tow planes there as well. And I tried to get them to come just tow me back, but their club policy actually has to be an airport. But I just chose, you know, I knew which way the wind was going. It was out of the northwest, which it kind of generally is here. And I chose a spot. There was like this little patch of flowers right by the road. And I was like, okay, that's my aiming point. And I just set up downwind and landed on it. And I mean, you know, a little exciting because it's not normally where you're landing, but it was really kind of no big deal. And so I think doing some grass landings like this would be good for us. And other club members, Corey and some others, have expressed trying to take us to another field somewhere, and at an actual grass field, and do like have an off-field landing party or something. So we'll look into that. I think that's a great idea.
Hey, Mike, can we jump back to the recommendations for a second?
Absolutely.
So getting a little bit more concrete, it strikes me that if the QFOP during that like final, you know, pre-check before takeoff does a comm check with the pilot in command and just says radio check, you know, confirm that they're on the right frequency, confirm that their radio is working, their battery's on. It establishes up front that you've got working communication on the frequency that the airport is using. And you also then have the opportunity to say, hey, you don't have a radio. What is our communication plan?
Right.
So I wonder if we want to amend the operations manual to include a comm check, either with the tow pilot or with the QFOP prior to takeoff, and establish that that's a.
I might suggest that the ideal time to do that would be when you're off the runway, and so you're not in the more concentrated environment, but you're in the, you know, let's get belts tightened, let's check the radio, let's do, you know, all that stuff. Also, it's just a less congested, I guess, environment, both in terms of the radio communications and in terms of the pilot's task loading. So I don't know, Mike and Mark, you guys may have other opinions about that, but I would say the time to, I would love to do that as a field person, when we're standing around kind of relaxed, talking about getting ballast in and getting seat belts tightened and all that stuff. That's the time to go through all of that stuff, make sure the equipment is working before you get out to the field. Because then if you're fumbling with the radio because you actually were on the wrong frequency, you've taken the pilot out of the moment at that point, you know. So I don't know, Mike and Mark.
No, that's a good point. I think we'll take that advice for sure. Take it to the club. We need to decide, you know, whether or not radios are gonna be a requirement for renting club ships. Ops check is definitely is vital to getting, or ops check of any equipment is vital before you go flying. And there's also usually a comm check when I'm towing anyway. I like to make sure I've got comms with the radio. So there's sort of another comm check there at the hookup.
Yeah. I mean, most pilots would generally make a call, you know, to the tow pilot when he's kind of like just warming up or just landing, like a testing, just like you do, like, you know, when you're renting your 172 somewhere and you're like calling over to the FBO. But to make it an official part of the procedure, I think is a great idea.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention, sorry, I wrote the ones that I didn't write down, or I did write down that weren't in the brief, was Mark's hotspots. So I like that too. That's definitely we'll put that in the recommendation deck in terms of the notch and the high school sort of being aerial, if you will, hotspots that we need to maybe make sure that we're at least not maneuvering there, or focused on looking for other traffic or whatever. So those are recommendations we'll take to the board. Okay. Anybody else? Any last minute comments? Save rounds. I think you know, I think we had a really good discussion here, and I think we can close this one and move forward. So Awesome.
Thanks,
for
Mike.
running.
Thanks a lot,
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
see you guys.
See ya.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.